Hello, talking about agricultural development and growth in the time period 1950 to 1990, and in that specifically, we were doing land reforms. And in land reforms, three measures that we discussed was abolition of intermediaries, tenancy reforms, and we will be talking about reorganization of agriculture. So we have finished the first measure, that is abolition of intermediaries, and in this we are going to talk about tenancy reforms. And in this, if you're talking about tenancy reforms, you have there are three types of tenants, like occupancy tenants, tenants at will, and subtenants. And the measures that we will study under tenancy reforms are regulation of rent, security of tenure, and ownership rights for tenants. So please go through this as I explained to you. So here it is. Yeah. So talking about tenancy reforms, tenants can be classified into three categories. Occupancy tenants, they enjoy permanent rights like the owner and do not face the fear of eviction as long as they are paying rent on time. And then we have second is tenants at will. They can be evicted from land anytime by the landlord. And then we have subtenants who cultivate the land of big landowners and are appointed by the occupancy tenants. Now, tenants at will and subtenants depend upon the mercy of landowners. Hence, their condition is miserable. So, then we came with the tenancy reforms. And these three measures are included in this. Number one was regulation of rent. So in pre-independent India, rents were as high as 50% of the produce was paid as rent. In some states, rent was as high as 70%. Can you beat that? Besides high rent, the tenant had to provide certain free services. Accordingly, tenancy legislations to regulate rent were passed. So they fixed the rent. In the first 5-year plan, the maximum rent was fixed as 1/4 or 1/5 of the total produce. And the maximum rent differs from state to state. For example, Orissa and Bihar rent was fixed at 1/4 of the gross produce, in Punjab 1/3, and in Rajasthan 1/6. The rates of rent also vary within the states because of the difference in fertility of land. So all this was taken into consideration when they were talking about this. The second measure was, in tenancy reforms, security of tenure. The security of tenure refers to the legal protection to tenants from their ejectment by landowners. So this creates interest among the cultivators for improving their land. To protect tenants from ejectment and to grant them permanent rights on land, laws have been enacted in states from time to time. So there were three aims. Number one, large-scale ejectments of tenants do not take place. They made sure that they were not at the mercy of the landlords. And then the resumption of land may be taken up by the owner for personal cultivation only. So if you wanted to take out a tenant, they had to make it clear that they were going to till the land. And third, that in the event of resumption, a prescribed minimum area is left with the tenant. You just can't take away everything from him. So that was regarding security of tenure, especially for these tenants at will and subtenants and occupancy tenants, especially for tenants at will and subtenants. And then we have this rights of ownership for tenants, a very important feature. So this measure of rights of ownership of tenants, as you see, this was a very important feature of land reform. That means they were given the right of ownership for tenants. The tenants should be made the owners of the land they cultivate. So some states also passed legislation to give them the right of ownership to the tenants. some states did not adopt legislations for giving the right of or giving the ownership right. Say in West Bengal, Karnataka, Kerala, they achieved more success than in other states. In West Bengal, for example, 14 lakh sharecroppers have been recorded under the Operation Barga. So anyway, what we have to say is that the there were a lot of, this measure was to make the tenants or give them the ownership rights so that they could work better, they were more confident, they had this sense of belonging and not the fear of being pushed out of the land anytime at the whims and fancies of these landlords.